Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen, and I'm the program manager for the Recycling Market Center. Today we have another special session featuring an NRC initiative that will focus on the key topics for extended producer responsibility for packaging legislation. Presenting today are Pete Adrian and Wayne Gjerde. They will be introduced by Lisa Skumatz, who will be handling the moderator duties today. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you to Gary Liss for providing the webinar content and securing the presenters today. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you have a question or comment, you can use the Q&A feature located on your control panel on your screen. And please note that the webinar is being recorded and an edited version of the webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And also, please note that the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, its affiliates, funders, the National Recycling Coalition, and additional sponsors assume no liability resulting from the use of any information provided during the webinar. The webinar is provided only as an informational tool, and no discrimination is intended and no endorsement by the organizations is implied. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. She's an economist and principal of the research and consulting firm for Skumatz Economic Research Associates, a WBE based in Colorado. She's been active in the performance evaluation, measurement, scenario modeling, and funding issues for solid waste programs and policies for more than 40 years. And she's also been active with the NRC since the 1980s and currently serves as the board chair. So Lisa, you're now the moderator.
Thanks very much, and thank you for that introduction, Wayne, and thank you as well, Gary and Pete, for the content in this session. I'm very pleased to be the moderator, and I happen to be a very timely moderator because just yesterday, an EPR bill passed both houses in Colorado, my home state's legislature, and this HB 22-1355 has a number of features in it, and including covering all companies selling consumer-facing packaging and printed materials, covered materials into the state. So it requires all companies selling those to fund and manage a coordinated statewide recycling system for all residents by joining either a producer responsibility organization or developing an individual company plan. It's a phased-in system that starts in the near term with a needs assessment and setting targets for the minimum content standards and recycling. Then it has to have the plan approved with advisory group input. In 2026, it gets implemented, and in 2028, it starts moving to the non-residential side as well. It establishes a statewide system for providing convenient recycling at no charge to residents. It establishes a clear and uniform statewide list of readily recycled materials, provides a sustainable funding mechanism for recycling that's funded through this PRO dues situation. It's a single producer responsibility organization with options after the first 5-year cycle. Companies can submit their own plans. It's industry funded and operated with the plan approved by a state agency with advice. And it covers all consumer facing packaging materials, paper products, and single use serviceware and so on. It's full cost reimbursement to service providers. And what I'm hoping is that I hope to hear that it ticks off a number of the advice and features that we'll be hearing about from Pete and Wayne. So thanks, and that again, it's just passed the legislature yesterday, both houses, awaiting the governor's signature. So
quickly, Lisa, we do have your video, so just so you know.
I know.
Okay, good.
I clicked it. That's why it's on.
Okay, good.
Thank you. So let me introduce our two presenters in alphabetical order because they'll be doing a back and forth. First, Pete Adrian is an engineer and he's the recycling coordinator for the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, Illinois, or SWALCO. He's been with SWALCO since 2001 and is principally managing the agency's electronics collection program, monitoring more than 40 residential and commercial waste and recycling service contracts, and implementing a variety of food waste diversion and composting programs, including coordination of the USDA Community Compost and Food Waste Reduction Grant. He's been assisting with education and awareness programs and household chemical waste collection, and he's active not only with with National Recycling Coalition, where he's co-chair of the legislative committee, but also he's vice president of the Illinois Counties Solid Waste Management Association and serves also is very active with SWANA. Wayne Gjerde is the Recycling Market Development Coordinator for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and he consults with startup and expanding companies in the areas of finance, new product development, business plan development, sales, and marketing. He's also done extensive work in economic analysis linking the environment and economy and extended producer responsibility and management. He's worked in the private and public sector, and he earned his BS in business administration and attended the Minnesota Bankers Commercial Lending School and Robert Morse Associates Commercial Lending School. He is also an NRC board member, and he's on the executive committee, and he co-chairs the Markets Council. I'll turn it over to our presenters, Pete and Wayne.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
This is Pete Adrian. I'm not sure if my video is available, so but we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so just an overview of today's program regarding the topic of key considerations for EPR packaging and products legislation. We're going to be talking about enacting and introduced packaging EPR laws first. We're going to follow that with what is producer responsibility in EPR. Then we're going to talk about some legislative strategies and key topics for structuring EPR packaging and product legislation, and then follow up with some input. Move on to the next slide. And Wayne?
Yes, and you see a map which has different shadings in there, and we've actually made some changes here actually in the last with Colorado and New York. So following last year's passage of packaging EPR laws in Maine and Oregon, a lot of other states have introduced bills this session. So we've had bills introduced in 12 states: California, Colorado, which Lisa talked about, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Virginia, Vermont, and Washington. So, and then recently, New York Assembly member Engelbright introduced a bill in the New York. And the Product Stewardship Institute has been instrumental in facilitating many of these multi-stake dialogues, providing legislative testimony and collaborating with coalitions in multiple states to move along these bills. So my experience with product stewardship goes back really to 2000, 2001 when it was formed. So it's been around a long time. Next slide.
Okay. So the NRC Legislative Committee, chose to strike out on this topic quite a while ago. I think over 3 years ago. This was kind of a idea of something NRC wanted to definitely get consensus on as to what is producer responsibility. We formed the Legislative Committee just this last year, so this is a relatively new committee that's been tackling some of this topic and tracking other legislative activity at the national level. But what we wanted to do is start with the definition of product stewardship, and we used the Product Stewardship Institute's definition as kind of the basis or the cornerstone. But we also then took some liberty to modify and clarify the idea and boil it down to producer responsibility versus extended. But bottom line is the definition is a collection of actions intended to minimize the health, safety, environmental, and social impacts of products and packaging throughout all life cycle stages. It also optimizes economic benefits by holding the producers responsible for their products and the impacts of them. The manufacturer, the producer of the product, has the greatest ability to minimize the adverse impacts, and the stakeholders such as suppliers, importers, retailers, and consumers also play vital roles. So programs that implement responsible resource stewardship can be either voluntary or required by law. again, I think what we saw just passed in Colorado, encompasses most, if not all, of these ideas. So quite happy to see how that bill is developed, and keep your fingers crossed that everything goes right and it gets passed. So moving on to the next one. This slide supplies a little bit more detail regarding what's meant by the producer responsibility idea. Again, the NRC Legislative Committee's efforts were to define producer responsibility. So what we looked at was this idea of assuring resources are handled responsibly following a hierarchy of highest and best use. This includes analysis to provide manufacturers with information necessary to design products and packaging to reduce those impacts. Also gives guidance to retailers to take back products and packaging or to facilitate the recovery of the resources, and to look at the full life cycle cost incorporated into the cost of business. Last of the pact is responsibilities and costs are to be shared among manufacturers, users, and products, users of the product, and the public and private service providers. So these points further detail beyond the definition of producer responsibility, and we feel that this is, really the pillars of what a good EPR program should encompass. Next slide, please. Wayne's turn. I'm not sure, Wayne.
Wayne, you're muted.
Oh, there we go. So I can hear. Okay. What is extended producer responsibility? Extended producer responsibility is a mandatory type of responsibility that includes, at a minimum, the requirement that the manufacturer's responsibility for products extends to post-consumer management of that product and its packaging. So this is maybe a little bit broader, but one of the key points is it's shifting financial responsibility upstream to the manufacturer and away from the public sector, which is generally been where, if not all, but most money has come to handle these issues. And then it also is to provide incentives to manufacturers to incorporate environmental considerations into their design. So essentially design for the environment. We've designed for the environment. I just want to say a little bit about that. It's been around for a long, long time. It's come and go, but now with these legislation, the manufacturers, I think, will have to pay a little bit more attention to that. So this is something that both NRC and SRA have been advocating for a long time in terms of the design for the environment. Next slide.
Okay, I'll take this one. So legislative strategies, and this is more or less what we've seen, but also what we identify as key components to good EPR. Most laws or bills that are on the books right now have many different types of legislative strategies in them, and I think as they develop, we're going to see some things that are going to really ring out, but the approaches do vary. There's more or less a carrot, and a stick approach in most cases, but we're looking to see what's working and what's not worked, and what are the unintended consequences that should be avoided in the future. So, we're looking at bans, fees, deposits, targets, mandates, penalties, content requirements, and possibly EPR without pros. And for those that don't understand, the PRO is producer responsibility organization. So that would be a clearinghouse or a group of producers that may come together and form either a non-for-profit to manage the requirements of the program. But the key points, the EPR should include some of, if not all of these strategies. And the document that we have put together, which I think we were going to link, but I don't know if we have the capability. outlines this. So we'll send that out to everybody if we don't have that available at this moment, because we were having some issues with putting things in a chat. So that said, I'll move on and pass it back to Wayne for the next slide.
Yes, and I'll make sure I'm not on mute. So key topics for structuring EPR packaging and products legislation. So Pete talked about producer responsibility organizations or not having a pro, and there's two ways to do that, where the government taxes the manufacturers the cost of properly managing the products, and then either an organization or panel or the government would do that. The key thing in all of this is to protect the money that's coming in and make sure that it is used as it was intended. So there's a variety of ways that you can do that. Enterprise funds, the money can go to a outside organization. One of the other things is that the appointing authority or governmental entity approved the plan. There should be a board that includes a variety of people and the general public and including the manufacturers. And it must be managed transparently by a public agency. In other words, there must be a plan, and the plan must be available to anybody who wants to see that. So there are, I think, are successful examples of this, and each state or each entity will probably do it a little different way. So next slide, Peter.
All right, I'll take this one now. So we're on key topics for structuring EPR for packaging and product legislation. So, you see these bullet points here. I think these are some things that, the NRC Legislative Committee was keying in on. One thing, we want to make sure that EPR occurs through the use of the existing infrastructure. Duplication of efforts and things like that are something that we're concerned is not necessarily a good thing. We want to see it built on existing systems and not interfere with those existing systems if they're in place. So whether that's deposit legislation in some states or other types of reuse or take back kind of styles that are in place already that are working. So we want to see some harmony in there. We also want to see the entity, if indeed there is a pro, would have to be approved by, say, an EPA or another governing body of the state. So these are some things that I think we felt are essential in the overall design of a good EPR. So if I guess anything else, your economic incentives obviously are also important as well. So I'm going to pass this back to Wayne on the next slide and continue.
Okay, these are key topics for legislation. So the producer responsibility programs, they should include requirements that packaging be designed to lowest life cycle impact. So a lot of life cycle analysis is, I would say, relatively new, and by that I mean probably the last 5 years. It's being used much more and more as time goes on in the design of the products or evaluating products. And there's also, we should recognize, for every pound a consumer throws away, there's 70 pounds of material discarded upstream. So again, design for the environment or design for life cycle impacts is very important. And this is most of the EPR focus on end of the pipe or end of the product's useful life and distribution of funds to the recycling program. So again, we look at the hierarchy, and of course, reduction and reuse obviously are at above this, but we can look at those things too. next slide, Pete, I think that's you.
Yes, it is. So again, apologies, we don't have the link, I believe, available to you to the document that we have in draft form that further draws out all of these concepts and points. But I do want to say that this slide is a summary of those document sections in the draft form, and it also kind of rolls back to the aforementioned high standards that we're outlining and discussing in this document. So we want to make sure that we're prioritizing reduce, redesign, repair, and reuse. We want to make sure that we've got standards in there for prevention and reuse and recycling and composting. We want to hold producers accountable for end-of-life products that they produce. Make sure that we're partnered and building with existing programs and getting community input through the process. Making sure that EPR programs are guided with independent public oversight. Banning any thermal processing of covered products and packaging. So this idea of alternative recycling or chemical recycling, these are some things that are still being kind of honed, but we don't want to see thermal processing as a means to manage these programs. So minimize and eliminate toxic substance also key. I think we're seeing a good effort being done in that, but we always got to be vigilant. And then of course justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion should always be something that we measure and hold a litmus test to. So I'll pass that back to Wayne. We're getting close to ending this, but yeah.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is essentially a graphic. You've probably seen many of these before. Ellen MacArthur has one, but the NRC has done a lot of work in market development and also returns. So the key to this is that it's not a linear process, but a circular process, that the material either isn't used in the first place, or the end market is utilizing those as nutrients for new products and helping that circle continue. So we've done things like that. I think market development has probably been the best example, but we have to move to a more circular economy in order to preserve the assets that we have in order to maintain what we're doing out there. So, and I have next slide. So we have a lot of resources. We just didn't come up with this by ourselves. These are available on the NRC website, I believe, but there's also a variety of organizations. You'll see SERA Club, ISRI, Product Stewardship Action Council. There's a lot of organizations. It isn't just NRC. And as we look forward, go forward and draft your policies or legislation, if that's what your organization is doing, make sure you avail yourselves of all these resources. And Peter, I think that's you.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, I do want to thank and recognize the members of the NRC 2020 Legislative Committee, of course, myself and Rick Anthony, our co-chairs, Bob Gjerde, the NRC president, distinguished to have him with us on our committee, as well as Maggie Clark, Wayne, Gjerde, Marta Keene, Gary Liss, and Mary Alice Pedersen. So I want to thank all of them for their hard work in bringing these concepts together and helping us hammer out what we have currently today as our draft document for these key concepts. And I want to move on to kind of our wrap up here. Wayne, thank you.
Yeah, well, the last slide, which I think is maybe one of the most important slides, is we can't do this by ourselves. So we're seeking input. We plan on, this is our second webinar on this. You know, if you're going to give us input, state what your organization is, what you support, what you don't support, what you support with changes, and you know, what should be strengthened, changed, or deleted. And you can send all that input to Peter at the address, email address on there. We look forward to receiving a large amount of input on this subject. So.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, so once again, Adrian@swalco.org. We'll be taking comments for the next 30 days or so on this, and we'll continue to keep updating both you, the attendees on this call today, and other MRC members on this content. So I think we're going to open it up to Q&A if we can. I don't know if this function's working quite well enough, but if anybody could try, even as a sample, putting in a question, and let's see if we can get some activity going here.
I think Wayne is next. Bowen.
Oh, right. Yes, Wayne had some comments to make also, and a couple other housekeeping tips.
Wayne, you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Yes, just want to mention the next webinar is actually this month. It's actually the part 2 of the federal funding webinar that was done, that Gjerde helped put together back in March. So we have another panel of presenters to provide an update on that topic. So just stay tuned for the promotion. I think it's going to be going out tomorrow morning to all our contacts. So you might be seeing something in your email inbox tomorrow. But if not, go to either the NRC-RMC.org website or the National Recycling Coalition website. They will have the registration details there. So thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. And I see that the question and answer function is working. So as you, the audience should type some questions in, but to prime that pump, I may start with a question if the team doesn't mind here. And one of the, there's one thing about crafting the legislation, and I think you've talked about a lot of the really great elements for that. Are there any tips that you've heard from states or something about success elements for getting it primed for passage? So the political side of it as well as the technical side? Yeah,
and Lisa, I'd like to welcome any other comments too. I mean, Gary List was joining us earlier too, but not to divert from your question, but Bob Gjerde also added a link to the Google Drive that draft document is in that I kept alluding to that we weren't able to show you. So I encourage everybody, click on that, save that link so you can go back to it later. But yeah, going back to your comments, Lisa, let me think about that. Wayne, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think in my previous experience with all legislation, I don't think this is unique. It's start early and have lots of conversations with your legislators, your supporters, the people who are going to lobby for this, even the people who are going to lobby against it, to see what their issues are. Obviously, as you move forward, the legislation moves forward, have as much information at hand as possible. If you're allowed to testify, that'll help you answer any questions, because my experience is in testifying is that they'll always throw a couple of out of left field or right field questions at you, and you don't want to be sitting there going, I don't know the answer to that question. It's always better to have as much knowledge or as much background as possible. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking from an Illinois perspective, start early and involve as many as possible, but identifying those key stakeholders, at least for Illinois, we know what organizations are going to have a strong lobby in opposition of this bill. And we're working with them as stakeholders in it to see if we can reach the path of yes. Because right now we know that right now the answer is no. Coming out of organizations, probably one of the most strongest verbal is the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, who has a very strong presence in Springfield at the rail. So we're not going to have a bill in Illinois unless we get past those differences with an organization like that, and that's got to be hammered out long before a bill gets presented. Otherwise, the lawmakers are going to just throw it back at us and say, "Go work it out before you bring it to us."
Well, I think that people also say that you may not get it past the first time, but the first time is sort of educating. And then the next time, maybe it's less educating, or maybe they, by that time, think it was their idea in the first place, which is never a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And in testifying, I often see a lot, I go to a lot of hearings and I hear a lot of people testify on what this thing will do for them, but not necessarily for something that appeals to the decision makers. And to put yourself in the place of the decision makers is pretty important, I think. So anyway, I haven't seen another question yet, although I'm shocked that Bob Gjerde hasn't had a question yet.
Oh,
What about has anybody measured the tonnage impacts of these things? You gave the link of 1 pound thrown away is 70 pounds upstream, but one in a state where something like this has passed, has anybody measured either bumps in reduction or in toxicity or other things like that? Is there any number that anybody can provide that would help make the case?
I know we measure electronics in Minnesota, and this is, and it's in the millions of pounds, but I don't have an exact number. But yes, this is material that used to go into the landfill and no longer goes to the landfill. I mean, not to say that there's not some small appliances, but it's been a huge improvement for the environment that we're not putting in material, and it's actually being utilized, the circuit boards and other stuff. Do we have issues with brominated fire retardant plastic? Yes. Well, we're trying to figure that out. But anyway, that's
yeah. The other thing, Oregon and Maine obviously are the only two that have actual law on the books. Colorado very soon, but so I don't think there's a lot of information coming out. But I believe those two states are doing some research right now to kind of come up with some better data, because I think the manufacturers are asking this too. And it's kind of interesting. The manufacturers don't necessarily know how much goods are sold from their company, but they don't necessarily track it by the state. And the retailers are really that piece, because they know what they're selling in their individual stores, and in their regions and within the states that they operate in. So there's data to be had there, Lisa. I think that's for sure.
Thanks. And I see that Bob Gjerde did provide additional information related to the first question. And he made another suggestion about how to get things passed is read the opposition written testimony submitted on the bills in New York, Hawaii, and Colorado to help prepare for your state's EPR testimony, because it's good to know the opposition's position. That's great advice also. I see a question posed by Neil Selman. It says, is the NRC actually lobbying for a particular bill, folks?
No.
No. I mean, I'll just give you a little background on the NRC Legislative Committee. Our intent is not to do that unless we're asked by a specific state for assistance, and even at that, we would want to review that and make sure that it's in accordance with our policies and whatnot. Lobbying is a tricky thing. I mean, we're not a lobbyist organization, so we wouldn't necessarily be doing that. Testimony, in behalf of something that we support, possibly, but as of right now, no.
I have another question, and that is there a lowest level that EPR can work? Can it work at the city level, or does it need to be state or federal or something different?
Good point.
This is Wayne. I think you have to have it do it at a state level. That's the only way that I think can work. Obviously, national legislation would work, although I don't think we have any examples of that. Maybe batteries, but I don't think there's any example of that at the moment.
Yeah, and there might be some small scale type EPR. I think of a local dairy that might use returnable glass bottles.
Sure.
That's a self-regulated EPR in a way. But does that encompass just a city? Probably not. It's probably going to be a region that they serve. So.
Yeah, now that you mentioned returnables, I believe Canada does have their beer bottlers do have a they're not states, but whatever, multi-region returnable bottle program, but not in the US.
Thank you. We have another comment here, and maybe this you can agree, disagree, or amplify, but the comment is, my opinion is that the battleground is control over the PRO that administers the EPR program. The power to control that funding mechanism is important. He notes that the NRC PowerPoint notes to avoid a monopoly PRO. Do you want to amplify that any?
Oh, Peter, I'll talk first and you can add on to. I think the idea behind a monopoly PRO is that it's not all manufacturers, or it's not all. You have to have a a diversified PRO that has people from every side of the industry on this. So that's what that means to me, Peter.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Going back to that one slide, we talk about it's the importance of managed, transparency by public agencies. So to let a pro or form and run the whole program without some level of administrative oversight from the public sector would be, I think, disingenuous.
Yeah.
I think that the Colorado one, just as an example, calls for the establishment of PRO, but then I think later on you can, there's also individual businesses or individual companies can establish their own plans. And then it says that there's a single PRO with the additional PRO after the first 5-year cycle. Have you heard of that before? Is that a model that's worked elsewhere?
I'm not aware of anybody doing that yet, but I think it's a good tiered approach. I don't know if it is, I guess we'll see how that works with 5 years from now.
Yeah. I think it's trying to avoid this monopoly issue. Yes.
Right. Right.
Lisa,
or create an opportunity to manage something that may not be really being managed either well or at all.
Lisa, this is Gary Liss. If I could interject, reading from the document, it says that producer responsibility for packaging best practices and maximum benefits will be from states that implement programs without producer responsibility organizations. It may be implemented by governmental entities taxing manufacturers for the cost of properly managing products and packaging according to the zero waste hierarchy of highest and best use, and establishing methods of reimbursing service providers for the cost of those systems.
Where are you reading from, Gary,
Gary,
first
could
of
you
all?
provide the page and or paragraph of that?
What are you reading from?
The document that this webinar is based on. It's
Oh,
page
Yep.
one, the
Thank you.
bottom of the page,
Didn't
the
know.
last paragraph.
I didn't know
And
if you were
then
talking about the Colorado legislation, so that's why I was confused.
Yeah, no.
So early on, Bob Gjerde did provide the link to that document that Gary was reading from. So again, if you can return back to that first note, you should be able to open that link.
We have a hand raised from Neil Seldman. I don't know if we can activate people by voice or not, but if not, then he can type his answer or his question. Try to let unmute Neil if possible. Neil?
Hang on a second. I'm going to try that.
But Neil, you might also be typing your question just in case it doesn't work.
Okay, I just unmuted Neil.
Okay.
Can you hear me, folks?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, everybody. And thanks for the information. I'm wondering, and let me know if you don't want to do this, but could we sort of back up from the weeds and talk about some major implications, particularly in Colorado, but not necessarily only in Colorado, the implications of local government and state officials assigning tasks that have been done by cities and counties for so long, and basically abdicating public responsibility and turning things over to a giant corporation, and particularly a corporation that is dominated by the petrochemical and plastic industry, which does not have a good record and is currently planning at least close to $100 billion of virgin plastic manufacturing in the US alone. And it's unclear to me how an EPR program I don't understand how this might work, but it's very interesting to know the reasoning that the folks who are behind the Colorado EPR bill as it is now. And I've had extensive discussions with them. And their basic philosophy or position is that state and local government officials, sorry about that, state and local government officials are not capable of managing a modern comprehensive recycling system. And therefore, because they're incapable, we have to go to the big corporations who are producing these things. And my question is, if you tax these folks, and as had been recently described, the money goes to government, that tax covers the cost of building a public servants at the state and local level to the competency and experience and ability to stand up to industry desires. And that is the alternative. So the folks in Colorado have chosen, it's their choice, to say, no, we're not going to tax these people and build our government. We're just going to let them take over. And by the way, they're in control of the plastic petroleum industry and their clients, and they're planning on more plastic production, more throughput, and more plastic incineration. I find that a very interesting and telling position to take by our friends in Colorado. And I'm wondering if other people are interested in exploring those implications.
Thank you for the comment. And so I'm just going to speak for Colorado, and I am on the policy committee that put that piece of legislation together. It was not because anyone is dissing anybody at the state or at the community level. It was because the costs are not cheap and growing. The variety of programs within the state varies quite a lot, and the access within the state varies quite a lot. This helps with the funding. And
Lisa, I appreciate.
Wait. We're not
Wait. But I must ask you. You've been talking for quite a while. Here's one last question, and then I'll sign off. Have you looked at the data from British Columbia where this system is in place? Stagnant recycling rates, increased costs, considerably increased costs. So I understand the ideology. I'm trying to see if we can deal with some facts.
Thank you. So now you're turning it over, and the other people are going to be answering. So please don't interrupt them. Let them give their comment, please. And so please, if Wayne and Pete would
Well-
like to please respond.
I think, at least as I hear it, Neil thinks there's going to be a monopoly, and I think the whole idea behind our saying is no to a monopoly, that it has to be a diversified form. And I think I can't really comment on Colorado, although I can comment on previous things that have happened in Minnesota. Is if it isn't working, you can change it. And that's the power of the government or the power of the entity that controls the plan that either the government is implementing or a PRO is implementing. And it can't, it works both ways. We have PROs and we have, in the case, I think, of electronics, we do not want. But if it isn't working, you can change it. So.
Yeah,
In Colorado. Go for it.
I understand Neil's points. However, the intent of what the NRC was doing here, in the legislative committee specifically, was to try to provide members of our coalition states that have differing views on how things should be done, some guiding principles that we feel are the cornerstone to something that would be considered good EPR. Now, that's debatable if EPR is good, period, but we feel that, this is something we want to have out there. So those 8 points that are outlined and that I went over earlier on slide 11 are really those capstones. And again, it brings back this idea of prioritizing, reduce, redesign, repair, reuse. It's really, again, Neil, it's backing away from the idea that we're giving them a free ticket to use virgin on everything that they manufacture. They've got to have higher standards. And again, using the unit of government, whether it's, the state EPA or whomever that entity might be at the state level that's assigned to this, the authority to hold these organizations, manufacturers, whomever they are, in check, so that they are abiding by these core principles and not just free run with whatever they wish to do.
Right, and it could have mandatory recycled content, requirements or a variety of things.
As they do, I believe
Yeah.
Colorado does too.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Are there other questions?
Yeah, this is Wayne Bowen here. I just want to ask on the number 6 there, ban on thermal processing of covered products and packaging. So Pennsylvania, I think the ceremony was yesterday. I don't know if it was a groundbreaking, but a huge facility is being proposed in Pennsylvania, a chemical recycler. They're looking at 450,000 pounds a year of, not pounds, tons a year of plastic as their feedstock. So I guess my question is, they might have a foothold now in Pennsylvania as far as, materials. And I would think maybe, politically they might be, of course, against all EPR. So my question, I guess, is there any wiggle room there to allow for maybe chemical recycling as long as it's made back into a polymer for another plastic product, or just something that would discourage just outright incineration and energy recovery?
Yeah, I'm going to
direct energy recovery.
I'm going to defer to Wayne Gjerde on this one, because I think.
Well, okay, this is where there's been a lot of advanced recycling legislation going on, and I think it has passed in 14 states. I don't know if that's the exact number, but here's the view of Minnesota and others. In fact, I was at the Corporate America Recovery Conference last week. If it is turned into fuel, it is not recycling, period. There are a couple of entities out there, Eastman Chemical and then Pure Cycle, which is mechanical recycling, Eastman that turn it back in the case of pure, it essentially chemically washes the PET, or I'm sorry, polypropylene, and is then reintroduced to the market. In terms of Eastman Chemical, it's a little bit further, but it's not exactly pyrolysis. But in the end, PET is made back into resin that can be reintroduced into there. Do I want to see, or do I think we should see plastic turn into fuel? I think that is a cop out. I think that's just a terrible thing to do. So don't call something recycling that isn't recycling. So.
Other questions? See, Neil wants to know about data from BC. Has anyone reviewed data from BC on how their programs are working?
Is that British Columbia?
Yes.
No.
I don't believe we brought that into our list of documents that we used for the development of this draft. Certainly we can review those.
All right. Well, that's a good, Neil, send Peter that's part of the input on the last slide. You should send Peter a email, and so we can remember to take a look at that.
We do have a document in there, the dark side of EPR in British Columbia. I'm not sure if that's what he's referencing, or if there's another study that was produced.
There have been several studies. The report you just mentioned is one, but that comes from industry. The independent economic analyses that are available were done by an economics professor at York University in Canada, and a full analysis of the British Columbia system was done by Zero Waste Canada about a year and a half ago, and all of those documents are available.
Yeah, I've read the work the gentleman from York produced. I'm not sure. I've had some. Well, I don't know. I didn't find it to be really compelling enough to make me believe that that's what's going on up there.
Well, there's also the report from the data in the report you already cited,
right?
The charts which show that there's been a stagnation in the recycling rate, and the costs have gone up about 24%. And of course, British Columbia started before EPR with a very good recycling program. So the fact that they've stagnated under EPR is significant.
Good point.
Lisa,
I wonder.
There's another question too. Sorry.
I understand that. I'm just.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm I forgot. Oh, so the question also then depends on what level of recycling they were at, because there is also a natural flattening off after you reach certain levels. It's not like it's a constantly progressing curve. After you cream, skim, and get the easy things, it's going to slow down at some point.
That's very interesting, Lisa, because in the United States, we've seen the recycling rate grow dramatically from 69 to around 205, and then completely stagnate at 35%, dipping down to 32 after the China fiasco. So what you say is true, but what are the reasons for that? Why is it stagnating? There are a number of reasons in the US situation, and then they perhaps are the same in the British Columbia, but the fact is that stagnation in recycling is certainly not par for the course.
Thank you. I see another question here. As someone from the South, I'm very concerned about chemical recycling. I don't want to see low-income neighborhoods abused. Does anybody want to talk about that a bit?
I can talk about that. So EPA and also a lot of states are incorporating environmental justice in there. Now, most plastic recycling is of mechanical nature. So essentially you have, you sort, you wash the plastic, you pelletize, which really doesn't, no matter where you have it, doesn't really generate any environmental considerations. Now, Chemical recycling, where you're using pyrolysis and other methods, you may have some air emissions in there. And I think I'll only speak for the state of Minnesota, but I can also say that is a topic for the EPA that if you're building a plant, that you incorporate decisions so there's you don't put these in neighborhoods that have already had maybe their brownfields or other past industries that have abused the neighborhoods. So
Thanks.
that's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions? I think I had one question, and that was, let's say a state puts in an EPR bill. What about the neighboring states, and what about the cities on the edges of the states? Do they complain about issues?
Well, I think we need some updated studies on there. The last update study that was done on that is, I think, 25 years old. It was pulled out that said, oh, well, people drive across the border, and this was in regards to deposit legislation, but I think it can do for other things. And quite frankly, with the cost of fuel, unless you're like 2 miles away, and even if you're 2 miles away, I don't think that's going to happen. And I'll give you a perfect example. This is a large, it's Total Wine. It's a large national organization that's it. So all the little liquor stores say, oh, this is going to put us out of business. Well, it didn't. All these little people are going to drive where they're going to drive. And for 10 cents or whatever the cost of it or the convenience of that, people are going to do what's convenient for them or what's cost effective for them. So that's my view.
Especially at $5 a gallon gas.
Yes.
Lisa, City of Chicago implemented a bottled water fee several years ago, and there was some, migration out of the city to buy water at some of the suburban venues and things or retails. But I don't think the impact after time has been that great. People have just kind of as we adjust to higher costs of goods, it continues. Now, that's not to say that doesn't marginalize anybody in the process, because it does. But
right.
Maybe another way to look at it is some blast tax situations on bags. We've seen some of that in place too. That doesn't seem to change people's shopping habits if they have to pay a nickel for a bag. If anything, they've reduced the amount of bags that they use. So, maybe,
which was the whole point of it in the first place.
Of course, they're visible costs in most cases. It's not a cost that's rolled into just the end of your ticket. So some people can make that decision, where I think what we're looking at with EPR is everything is going to be very negligible, and the true cost on the goods going up because it's going to be spread out so widely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're just about out of time. I don't see any additional questions. So I might, one, thank our speakers. Thank you very much. And two, turn it back to Wayne to mention one more time the upcoming webinar.
Yeah, May 24th. I believe it's at 2 o'clock. Is that right, Gary? Just look out for the emails and check the websites for the registration details. Again, it's the second part of the federal funding webinar that Gary put together in March. So hope you can join us. So again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded. Will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks to all the attendees for your time.
You all.
Thank you.
Great day.